There is a forest in Germany where every tree stands at nearly the same height. From a distance, it looks natural, dense, green, continuous, but as you move closer, something begins to feel arranged. The trunks rise evenly, spaced with quiet precision. The canopy forms a uniform ceiling, almost as if it were designed rather than grown. And then you notice the detail that is easy to overlook. They are all roughly the same age, not just in this forest, but in many others across different parts of the world. Large areas of woodland where trees share similar growth patterns, similar height, similar maturity, entire ecosystems that appear to have begun at the same time. At first, this is not unusual. Forests regenerate. Fires, storms, and human activity can clear land, allowing new growth to emerge. When this happens, trees often grow together, creating what is known as even-aged stands. This is the official explanation, and in many cases, it is entirely valid. But when these patterns appear across vast regions, sometimes in places where no clear record of such events exists, the explanation begins to feel incomplete, because forests, left undisturbed, tend to be irregular. They are layered. Old trees, young trees, fallen trunks, gaps in the canopy, variations in height and density. A natural forest is not uniform. It is chaotic, shaped by time and randomness. And yet, in certain places, that chaos is missing. Instead, there is consistency, a kind of quiet order. It is not just the age of the trees, it is the spacing, the alignment, the way light filters through in evenly distributed patterns. The absence of the irregularities one might expect from something that has developed over centuries without interruption. In some regions, historical records suggest reforestation efforts, land cleared for agriculture, then later replanted, managed forests designed for timber production, rows of trees planted deliberately, often in straight lines. This accounts for a significant portion of these patterns, but not all of them, because there are forests that do not show clear signs of planting, yet still exhibit similar uniformity. No visible rows, no obvious human intervention, and yet the age distribution remains narrow. It is here that the pattern becomes more difficult to define, not impossible to explain, but harder to place within a single narrative. And as with many things that fall between categories, it tends to be overlooked. There is also the matter of time. Tree age is not always immediately visible. It requires measurement, analysis, counting rings, comparing growth patterns. And when this is done, the results can be surprising, not because they are extraordinary, but because they are consistent. Large numbers of trees within a given area, beginning their growth within a relatively short window, a shared starting point. The reasons for this could be natural: disturbances that reset the landscape, floods, disease events that clear space for new growth. But for such events to account for multiple regions across different environments raises another question. Were these disturbances more widespread than we assume? Or are we seeing the result of something else? Human influence remains a strong explanation. Forestry practices have shaped landscapes for centuries, sometimes in ways that are no longer immediately recognizable. Land may have been cleared and replanted long before modern records were kept. Patterns may persist even when their origins are forgotten. This is plausible, but it introduces a subtle uncertainty, because if the origins of these forests are not fully documented, then the uniformity we observe becomes harder to trace. It becomes a pattern without a clear beginning, and patterns without clear beginnings tend to invite further attention. There is also a visual aspect to this that is difficult to ignore. When seen from above through aerial photography or satellite imagery, these forests often reveal geometric qualities, boundaries that appear to defined, sections that transition abruptly, areas that seem divided into segments rather than flowing organically. Again, this can be explained: land management, property lines, environmental planning. But when combined with the age uniformity, the effect becomes more pronounced, not unnatural, but not entirely organic either. And this is where the question begins to shift, not from whether these forests are natural or artificial, but from how they came to be as they are, because the distinction is not always clear. Human activity and natural processes often overlap, blending into landscapes that are difficult to categorize. A forest may begin as a natural regrowth, then be shaped by human intervention, then left to develop on its own. Over time, the original cause becomes less visible. What remains is the pattern, and the pattern, in this case, is consistency. Consistency across space, consistency across time, a quiet repetition that suggests something systematic, even if the system itself is not immediately apparent. This does not imply anything hidden or deliberate in the sense of concealment. It simply suggests that the processes shaping these environments may be more structured than we tend to assume, that what appears natural may, in part, be guided, and what appears uniform may have origins that are not immediately visible. There is also the broader implication to consider. If large sections of forests are relatively young, then the landscapes we see today may not be as old as they appear, not in geological terms, but in ecological ones. The idea of ancient, untouched forests becomes more complex when examined closely. Some are indeed ancient, others are newer than they seem, and distinguishing between the two is not always straightforward. This does not diminish their value, but it changes the narrative from one of continuous, uninterrupted growth to one of cycles, reset, regrowth, possibly repeated more often than we realize. And perhaps that is where the most interesting question emerges. Not whether these forests are natural or planted, but how often landscapes change without leaving a clear record. Because if entire ecosystems can reset, regrow, and stabilize within relatively short periods, then the surface of the world may be more dynamic than it appears, more subject to change, more responsive to forces that are not always immediately visible. So when we walk through a forest that feels older than it is, when we look up at trees that seem timeless, yet share the same beginning, it may be worth considering not just what we are seeing, but what existed there before, and whether the uniformity we notice is simply a feature of nature, or a trace of something that has already happened and quietly been replaced.